live.
Okay. Thank you again, councillors, and welcome to our council meeting this evening. May I also extend a warm welcome to members of the public who are watching our webcast. We'd like to remind all members to turn your camera and microphone off if you haven't done so already. Before we turn to the business for the meeting, I will ask Vicky Shaw to undertake a roll call of members. Please, can I ask that you introduce yourself for the benefit of people watching the webcast and to speak clearly into your microphones. When you have finished speaking, please turn your camera and microphone off. Vicky, roll call.
Good evening, members. Councillor Anderson.
Tom Anderson, present.
Councillor Berry.
Councillor Bruce Berry, present.
Councillor Bird.
I'm present, thank you.
Councillor Brame.
Councillor Alan Brame, present, thank you.
Councillor Burgess-Joyce.
Good evening, Vicky. Councillor Burgess-Joyce, present.
Councillor Cameron.
Hello, Helen Cameron, present.
Councillor Cannon.
Councillor Cannon, present.
Councillor Carabia.
Good evening, Vicky. Councillor Carabia, present.
Councillor Cleary. Councillor Cleary. I'll come back to Councillor Cleary at the end, see if he's been able to join us. Councillor Clements.
Councillor Wendy Clements, present.
Councillor Collins.
Councillor Mike Collins, present.
Councillor Cook.
Councillor Chris Cook, present.
Councillor Corkill.
Councillor Andy Corkill, present.
Councillor Cottier.
Tony Cottier, present. Good evening.
Councillor Cox.
Hi Vicky, yes, present.
Councillor George Davis.
Hi Vicky, Councillor George Davis, present.
Councillor Fowkes.
Hi, present and correct.
Councillor Frost.
Good evening, Vicky, present.
Councillor Gardner.
Councillor Andrew Gardner, present.
Councillor Gilchrist.
Good evening, Councillor Phil Gilchrist, present, thank you.
Councillor Greenie.
Councillor Carl Greenie, present. Good evening.
Councillor Green.
Evening, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Jeff Green, present.
Councillor Gray.
Councillor Gray, present.
Councillor Paul Hayes.
Good evening, present.
Councillor Steve Hayes.
Good evening, Councillor Steve Hayes, present.
Councillor Andrew Hodson.
Good evening, Victoria, present.
Councillor Kathy Hodson.
Councillor Kathy Hodson, present.
Councillor Johnson.
Councillor Jenny Johnson, present.
Councillor Adrian Jones.
Councillor Adrian Jones, present.
Councillor Chris Jones.
Evening, Vicky. Councillor Chris Jones, present.
And I think Councillor Sharon Jones has sent her apologies for this evening. Councillor Tony Jones.
Good evening, Councillor Tony Jones, present.
Councillor Jordan.
Councillor Mary Jordan, present.
Councillor Kelly.
Yep, Stuart Kelly, present.
Councillor Kenny.
Councillor Brian Kenny, present. Thank you.
Councillor Leach.
Good evening, Councillor Anita Leach, present.
Councillor Lewis.
No problem, mate. I'll make sure you know that.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Ian Lewis,
Present.
Councillor McLaughlin.
Okay.
Good evening, Councillor Boyd McLaughlin present.
Councillor McManus.
Hello, Councillor McManus present.
Councillor Mitchell.
Councillor Dave Mitchell present. Good evening.
Councillor Muspratt.
Hi, Councillor Muspratt present.
Councillor Nolan.
Councillor Yvonne Nolan present.
Councillor Norbury.
Hi Vicky, Councillor Norbury present.
Councillor Povell.
Hello, Councillor Cherry Povell present.
Councillor Rennie.
Councillor Leslie Rennie present.
Councillor Robinson.
Councillor Robinson present. Thank you.
Councillor Rowlands.
Hi Vicky, Councillor Rowlands present.
Councillor Smith's obviously present. We've heard him speak.
Present.
Councillor Spohr.
Good evening, Sarah Spohr present.
Councillor Spriggs.
Good evening, Councillor Christine Spriggs present.
Councillor Stapleton. Councillor Stapleton. No, I'll come back to Councillor Stapleton at the end. Councillor Stewart.
Councillor Paul Stewart present.
Councillor Sullivan. No, Councillor Sullivan. I'll come back to Councillor Sullivan. Councillor Usher.
Councillor Usher, good evening Vicky and everyone.
Councillor Walsh. Councillor Walsh.
Excuse me, Vicky, it's Tony Cartier. Councillor Walsh is having difficulties getting in. He is still trying, so hopefully he can get back to us.
Okay, I'll come back to Councillor Walsh. Councillor Whittingham.
Councillor Whittingham present.
Councillor Irene Williams.
Councillor Irene Williams present.
Councillor Jerry Williams.
Present. Thank you, Vicky.
Councillor Steve Williams.
Councillor Steve Williams present.
Councillor Williamson.
Councillor Williamson present.
Councillor Wood.
Good evening everyone, Councillor Gillian Wood present.
And Councillor Wright.
Good evening, Alison Wright present.
Thank you. I'll just go back to those members who weren't present the previous time.
Vicky,
Councillor Cleary.
Councillor Cleary was having connection problems earlier. I don't know if those have been resolved or not.
I'm here, Vicky. Things seem to be working at the moment, but I can't guarantee it for the next few hours.
Thank you. Councillor Stapleton, have you been able to join us?
Hello, Vicky. It's Julie McManus here. I've had an apology from Councillor Stapleton, who said that she will contact us tomorrow to explain why she couldn't attend, but it's a late apology. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Sullivan. Has Councillor Sullivan been able to join us yet? No. Councillor Walsh. Councillor Walsh. So I think, Mayor, that's everybody present except for Councillor Sullivan and Councillor Walsh, and we have apologies from Councillor Stapleton and Councillor Sharon Jones.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Vicky. Right. Before we get on to the business this evening, I'd just like to say it is with deep regret that I announce the recent passing of former councillor Bill Davis. I'm sure you will all join me in expressing our sincere condolences to Bill's family and friends. I'd ask members to join me for a minute in silence in memory of Bill. Thank you. Yes, thank you, everyone. I've just been informed that Councillor Walsh has managed to get in on a separate account and that, so he is with us.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
Sorry, he's now lost connection again. So apologies,
right.
he's not with us now. Thank you.
Sorry, I just got a message on my screen that he had, yes. Okay, thanks, Councillor Leach. Okay, I'd like to move on to declarations of interest. Members are asked to consider whether you have any disclosable pecuniary or any other relevant interest in connection with any matters to be determined at this meeting, and if so, to declare it and state the nature of such interest. Can I remind members that if you have a personal and prejudicial interest and need to leave the virtual meeting room, you're asked
Start.
Okay, we're back again, everyone. So we'll move on to Treasury Management Annual Report 2019-20. This is a referral from the Cabinet meeting held on the 27th of July 2020. I call on Councillor Jeanette Williamson to move the recommendations detailed in the report. Councillor Williamson.
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
Calling Councillor Anita Leach to second.
Seconded, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Again, the procedure is Councillor Williamson, you have up to 5 minutes to speak to your motion.
Mr. Mayor, I don't intend to speak to this tonight.
So not aware of any amendments, so I'll move to the debate. Does anyone want to?
Mr. Mayor, I'm not going to speak either.
Okay, that's fine. Okay. So again, no right to reply then. Don't wish to speak, Councillor Williamson? No?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Be no further comments. We'll move to the vote. I will take this vote by assent. So again, if any member is not in agreement, can you please say so now or indicate in the chat facility? I think that is agreed. Thank you. Right, we move on to item 6, reports and recommendations from council committees for consideration and reports from council committees. One referral this evening, members from the Policy and Resources Committee on the 7th of October 2020 requesting that the Local Plan Steering Subcommittee be removed from political balance requirements in accordance with requirements of the Local Government Housing Act 1989, so that it be constituted in a manner that reflects the membership of the Local Plan Advisory Group, being one member from each political group on the council. I call on Councillor Jeanette Williamson to move the recommendation.
So moved, Mr Mayor.
Call on Councillor Phil Gilchrist to second.
Yes, Mr Mayor, I'm pleased to second this. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, Councillor Williamson, again, you now have 5 minutes to speak to your motion.
Mr Mayor, I don't intend to speak to this.
Right. Are there any speakers? You have up to 3 minutes to address the council. No? Seconder, Councillor Gilchrist, you now have up to 3 minutes to speak to the motion.
I don't think there's a need to speak at length, Mr Mayor. This has been a successful group and I'm pleased that it should continue on the widest basis possible.
Thank you. Councillor Williamson, right to reply? No. No. Okay, there will be no further comments. We will now move to the vote. I'm now going to invite Vicky Shaw to undertake a roll call, as this requires no member to vote against. Vicky, can I ask you to do the roll call, please?
Of course. Councillor Anderson?
Tom Anderson, 4.
Councillor Berry?
Councillor Bruce Berry, 4.
Councillor Bird?
Councillor Bird, 4.
Councillor Brame?
Alan Brame, 4.
Councillor Burgess-Joyce?
Councillor Burgess-Joyce, 4.
Councillor Cameron?
Councillor Helen Cameron, 4.
Councillor Cannon?
Councillor Kate Cannon, 4.
Councillor Carabea?
Councillor Carabea, 4.
Councillor Cleary?
Pat Cleary, 4.
Councillor Clements?
Councillor Wendy Clements, 4.
Councillor Collins?
Councillor Mike Collins, 4.
Councillor Cook?
Councillor Chris Cook, 4.
Councillor Corkill?
Andy Corkill, 4.
Councillor Cottier?
Councillor Cottier, 4.
Councillor Cox?
Someone there.
Tony Cox, 4.
Councillor George Davis?
Councillor George Davis, 4.
Councillor Fowkes?
Councillor Steve Fowkes, 4.
Councillor Frost?
Councillor Sam Frost, 4.
Councillor Gardner?
Councillor Andrew Gardner, 4.
Councillor Gilchrist?
Councillor Phil Gilchrist, 4. Thank you.
Councillor Greenie?
Councillor Carl Greeny, 4.
Councillor Green?
Councillor Jeff Green, 4.
Councillor Gray?
Councillor Gray, 4.
Councillor Paul Hayes?
4.
Councillor Steve Hayes?
Councillor Steve Hayes, 4.
Councillor Andrew Hodson?
4. Andrew Hodson, 4. Sorry.
Councillor Kathy Hodson?
Councillor Catherine Hodson, 4.
Councillor Johnson?
Councillor Jenny Johnson, 4.
Councillor Adrian Jones?
Adrian Jones, 4.
Councillor Chris Jones?
Chris Jones, 4.
Councillor Tony Jones?
Councillor Tony Jones, 4.
Councillor Jordan?
Councillor Mary Jordan, 4.
Councillor Kelly?
Stuart Kelly, 4.
Councillor Kenny?
Councillor Brian Kenny, 4. Thank you.
Councillor Leach?
Councillor Anita Leach, 4.
Councillor Lewis?
That'll put some fresh air through, won't it?
Lewis, 4.
Councillor McLaughlin?
Sorry?
McLaughlin, 4.
I can't hear you.
Councillor McManus?
Councillor McManus, 4.
Councillor Mitchell?
Councillor Dave Mitchell, 4.
Councillor Muspratt.
Councillor Christina Muspratt, 4.
Councillor Nolan.
Councillor Yvonne Nolan, 4.
Councillor Norbury.
Councillor Tony Norbury, 4.
Councillor Povell.
Councillor Cherry Povell, 4.
I will cover.
Councillor Rennie.
None.
Councillor Leslie Rennie, 4.
Councillor Robinson.
Councillor Robinson, 4.
Councillor Rowlands.
Councillor Les Rowlands, 4.
Councillor Smith.
4.
Councillor Spohr.
Sarah Spohr, 4.
Councillor Spriggs.
Councillor Christine Spriggs, 4.
Councillor Stewart.
Councillor Paul Stewart, 4.
Councillor Sullivan.
Mike Sullivan, 4.
Councillor Usher. Councillor Usher.
Councillor Usher, 4.
Councillor Walsh.
Councillor Walsh is still having problems, Vicky, I'm afraid. He had a picture and no sound, and now he's lost both.
Oh dear. Councillor Whittingham.
Councillor Wiscombe, 4.
Councillor Irene Williams.
Councillor Irene Williams, 4.
Councillor Jerry Williams.
4.
Councillor Steve Williams.
Councillor Steve Williams, 4.
Councillor Williamson.
Councillor Williamson, 4.
Councillor Wood.
Councillor Wood, 4.
Councillor Wright.
Councillor Wright, 4.
Are there any members whose names I haven't called? No. I think that vote was carried unanimously, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Vicky. Thanks very much for that. Okay, we'll move on to B, decisions taken since the last council meeting. For members' information, it is under this item that we would normally be asked to receive the minutes of committee meetings with an opportunity to ask questions of committee chairs. Given that the committees have only recently started to meet, there are yet no minutes to receive this evening. And under section C, joint arrangements and external organisations. No reports or questions have been received in advance of the meeting on this item. Right, now we move on to, I'm just looking at it, move on to notices of motion. Councillors, we now move to item 7 on the agenda, and the council is invited to consider the following motions which have been submitted in accordance with Standing Order 13. Right, motion 1, overcoming COVID failures to build the test and tracing system Wirral needs. I now invite councillors Jeanette Williamson and Phil Gilchrist to move and second the motion on page 7 of the summons. Councillor Williamson, sorry.
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor
So moved,
Gilchrist.
Mr.
Thank you.
Yes,
Councillor
I'm pleased
Gilchrist.
to second, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Bob. Right, Councillor Williamson, you now have up to 5 minutes to speak to your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, when the NHS test and trace system was launched in late May, Boris Johnson promised it would help move the country forward. We would be able to see our families go to work and stop the economy from crumbling. In the absence of a vaccine, the Prime Minister's well-beating system would be worth every penny of the £10 billion funding that our Chancellor Rishi Sunak announced in July. We were told it would enable people to carry on normal lives. The NHS Test and Trace programme is a £10 billion national cross-government programme chaired by Baroness Dido Harding. reporting directly to the Prime Minister and to the Cabinet Secretary. It has 4 objectives: to increase the availability and speed of testing, to identify possible close contacts of those who test positive and ask those close contacts to isolate, rapidly identify and contain outbreaks, and enable the government to learn about infection rates and respond appropriately. The contact tracing element of the programme has had ongoing challenges around contacting both cases and their contacts. This includes not contacting cases and identifying contacts in a timely way, not identifying all contacts, not contacting those identified as close contacts in a timely way to advise them to self-isolate, making multiple calls to members of the same household. Now here on Wirral, Mr Mayor, as pubs and gyms have been ordered to close, extended families forced to stop meeting, and as intensive care beds fill up fast, the government's sage scientific advisors have concluded that NHS test and trace is not working. Too few people are getting tested, results are coming back too slowly, and not enough people are sticking to their instructions to isolate, they say. There's a 65% contact rate in Wirral, which I think we can all agree is not good enough. We've recently had more than 15,800 positive cases go missing in the UK, and this distorted our own data on Wirral with an underreporting of COVID cases. Apparently the off-the-shelf spreadsheet software was unable to cope with the volume of new cases. Worryingly, not only were those 15,800 cases not contacted, but neither were the many more people who needed to be told to self-isolate until they tested negative. Mr Mayor, we have to recognise that the national well-beating system is not working anywhere near as well as it should have, and this is putting people's lives at stake. I'm really pleased that the government listened to the concerns and demands of the Liverpool City region leaders over the past 2 weeks. We need additional funding to an already stretched council, and we need to deliver a local test and tracing system. We also need general assistance with our budgetary pressures in year and for next year. Ian Hudspeth, chair of the LGA's Community Wellbeing Board, said recently, local residents recognise and can relate to their local council, which is not always possible with a national test and trace system. Council staff can go to people's homes to make sure that they are aware of what they need to do. Mr Mayor, we've been placed under the tightest Tier 3 restrictions on Merseyside this last week. Our businesses have been forced to close. Our NHS is being overwhelmed. COVID is costing lives and livelihoods on Wirral. We can only tackle this pandemic with cooperation, with a functioning and well-resourced NHS, and an adequately resourced local test and trace system. Mr Mayor, I am grateful of the additional funding that the governments have now given us for local test and tracing. I feel that we will be in a much better position to carry out test and tracing. And I'd like to thank my colleagues in public health, in the NHS and across the council who are working tirelessly to combat this horrendous pandemic and to support the people of Wirral. And I'd like to put on record my continued thanks to our residents, to our businesses and to our communities for everything they have done during the pandemic and will continue to do. Mr Mayor, we will get through this together. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Williamson. Right, I'm aware of one amendment in respect to this motion and refer councillors to the supplementary agenda pack. The councillors moved by Councillor Karubia and Mitchell. But before inviting the councillors to move the amendment, I'd like to just say something. I'd just like to remind councillors that following the adoption of the new constitution and consideration by the Standards and Constitution Committee, section 15(6)(b) of the Constitution takes us back to the model where only one amendment may be moved and discussed at any one time. No further amendment may be moved until the amendment under discussion has been disposed of. With that in mind, I call on Councillor Karubia to move this amendment.
So moved, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Mitchell to second.
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
Right, Councillor Carabia, you have 3 minutes to speak to the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I won't be taking the 3 minutes. I think as this is a friendly amendment to the original motion, I don't think it needs a great deal of conversation on it. It is literally just asking for them to, urging them to follow in the interest of reducing poverty and hardship for the people of Wirral. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Now I'm going to open this to a debate on the amendment only and vote before we turn to the original motion as amended or otherwise. So do any councillors wish to speak on the amendment? And you have up to 3 minutes to address the council. Right. I take that as no. Okay. We'll now move on to the seconder of the amendment, Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I formally second this and do not wish to speak on it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And the proposer of the original motion, right of reply, Councillor Carubia.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor. No need to speak on this, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
No. Okay then. Okay, there'll be no further speakers. I'll now move to the vote on the amendment. So I'm going to ask Vicky Shaw to undertake a roll call of members. Vicky?
Thank you. Councillor Anderson?
Tom Anderson, 4.
Councillor Berry?
Councillor Berry, 4.
Councillor Bird?
Councillor Bird 4.
Councillor Brame?
Alan Brame, 4.
Councillor Burgess Joyce?
David Burgess Joyce, 4.
Councillor Cameron?
Helen Cameron 4.
Councillor Cannon?
Councillor Cannon 4.
Councillor Carabia?
Councillor Carabia 4.
Councillor Cleary?
Pat Cleary, 4.
Councillor Clements?
Councillor Clements 4.
Councillor Collins?
Councillor Mike Collins, 4.
Councillor Cook?
Chris Cook, 4.
Councillor Corkill?
Andy Corkill, 4.
Councillor Cottier?
Tony Cottier, 4.
Councillor Cox?
4.
Councillor Davis?
Councillor George Davis, 4.
Councillor Fowkes?
Councillor Steve Fowkes, 4.
Councillor Frost?
Councillor Sam Frost 4.
Councillor Gardner?
Councillor Andrew Gardner, 4.
Councillor Gilchrist?
4. Thank you.
Councillor Greenie?
Councillor Carl Greenie, 4.
Councillor Green?
Councillor Jeff Green, 4.
Councillor Gray?
Councillor Gray 4.
Councillor Hayes? Councillor Paul Hayes?
4.
Councillor Steve Hayes?
Steve Hayes, 4.
Councillor Andrew Hodson?
Andrew Hodson, 4.
Councillor Kathy Hodson?
Catherine Hodson 4.
Councillor Johnson?
Councillor Johnson 4.
Councillor Adrian Jones?
4.
Councillor Chris Jones?
Councillor Chris Jones, 4.
Councillor Tony Jones?
4.
Councillor Jordan?
Councillor Mary Jordan 4.
Councillor Kelly?
Stuart Kelly, 4.
Councillor Kenny?
Councillor Brian Kenny, 4. Thank you.
Councillor Leach?
Councillor Anita Leach 4.
Councillor Lewis?
Councillor Ian Lewis, 4.
Councillor McLaughlin?
Councillor Maura McLaughlin, 4.
Councillor McManus?
Councillor Julie McManus 4.
Councillor Mitchell?
4.
Councillor Muspratt,
Councillor Muspratt 4.
Councillor Nolan,
Councillor Nolan 4.
Councillor Norbury,
Councillor Tony Norbury 4.
Councillor Povell,
Councillor Cherry Povell 4.
Councillor Rennie,
Councillor Leslie Rennie 4.
I'm going to speak against it.
Councillor Robinson,
Councillor Robinson 4.
Councillor Rowlands,
Councillor Les Rowlands 4.
Councillor Smith,
Abstain.
Councillor Spoor,
Councillor Spoor 4.
Councillor Spriggs,
Councillor Christine Spriggs 4.
Councillor Stapleton.
She's not there.
Sorry, Councillor Stapleton's not present, is she? Councillor Stewart,
Councillor Paul Stewart 4.
Councillor Sullivan,
Mike Sullivan 4.
Councillor Usher, Councillor Usher,
Apologies, Vicky. My Surface Pro is lagging. Councillor O'Shea 4.
Councillor Walsh,
Councillor Joe Walsh 4.
Councillor Whittingham,
Councillor Stuart Wiscombe 4.
Councillor Irene Williams,
Councillor Irene Williams 4.
Councillor Jerry Williams,
4.
Councillor Steve Williams,
Councillor Steve Williams 4.
Councillor Williamson,
Councillor Williamson 4.
Councillor Wood,
Councillor Wood 4.
Councillor Wright.
Councillor Wright 4.
Thank you. Just wait for the confirmation of the numbers.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I can confirm that was 59 councillors for with 1 abstention. Thank you, Vicky.
Okay, so that's been agreed. As we've got no further amendments, do any councillors wish to speak on the substantive motion? No. If the councillor wish to exercise his or her right to speak as seconder of the original motion?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, when I'm called, thank you.
Right, okay. Does council wish to exercise his or her right to apply to the proposer of the original? So, okay, councillor, yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Our country's been preparing for this and living with this virus for some 10 months. I see another member's got their hand up, Mr. Mayor, and may want to speak. So
Yeah,
do you want
sorry.
to check with that member?
Thank you, I will. Is it Julie McManus, Councillor Julie McManus?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you,
Sorry, I missed
Councillor
your hand.
Gilchrist.
Mr. Hand, sorry.
It's okay, no worries. The failure of the national test and trace system and the inclusion of Wirral into Tier 3 restrictions has placed many of our smaller businesses into extreme financial difficulty. And I therefore welcome the announcement today from our new council leader, Councillor Williamson, along with the Metro Mayor and other leaders within the city region. Whilst clearly conscious of the high rates of coronavirus in our region, I must place on record my disappointment that government have insisted that gyms and leisure centres in our region close. Our leadership has continually requested scientific evidence from government to explain why our gyms were closed, and sadly I believe these requests have been ignored. This is in stark contrast to Lancashire, a Tier 3 like us, but clearly not being treated like us, as the government has not closed their gyms. Is it any wonder that people are confused? I don't believe any of us would argue that regular exercise improves both physical and mental well-being, much needed in the current climate, Mr. Mayor. If evidence is not available, I would very much welcome the suggestion that government give local leaders the power to safely reopen gyms in our area. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. I've also got a number of other people now who wish to speak. Councillor Mary Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, whilst I'm more than happy to support a motion calling for effective track and trace, that does not negate the fact that everyone has to accept some personal responsibility. Mr. Mayor, this virus never went away. We locked ourselves away, and when we ventured out, a second wave was always inevitable. It'll be with us until we have a safe and effective vaccine. Mr. Mayor, we have some simple rules. Hands, face, space. It really isn't that difficult. Yet the scenes we've seen over the summer, and particularly this past weekend, are an absolute disgrace, particularly when the City Mayor's own brother had just passed away. Public Health have told us that the initial spike was with the 20 to 29-year-olds, an age group that generally has mild symptoms. Now the virus has been transmitted to the older age groups. Hospital beds are filling up and ITU is nearing capacity. In the first wave, all cancer trials were paused to divert resources to COVID research. We are only just beginning to get back to something resembling normal when we are hit with a second wave. It is likely that the big acute trusts will once again cut back on these trials. For some cancer patients, a trial therapy is their last resort. And what about the staff? They are exhausted. Some left their families for 12 weeks last time round. Research following the SARS outbreak shows critical care nurses becoming anxious, depressed, and alcohol dependent. So yes, let's have an all singing, all dancing track and trace system, but let's also have some personal responsibility for our own health and that of the wider community. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Jordan. I've got Councillor Tony Norbury. Councillor Norbury.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I won't take too long. It's absolutely obvious to me not to blame the people who are following advice that's given to them and need to adhere to that advice, but it's the government that needs to adhere to scientific advice. And the scientific advice that we're being given is we need a world-class track and trace system. Track and trace and test is proven throughout the world in other countries to get a grip of coronavirus. If we don't follow the scientific advice, and the scientific advice at the moment is telling us to have mini lockdowns as they have in Wales and Northern Ireland, the scientific advice is not being adhered to by this government, and that is creating a situation which is like what the scientists are saying, it's a Groundhog Day. If we don't have effective track and trace, this virus will keep coming back all the time, and we will continue to have tier 3, tier 2, tier 1, or local lockdowns again. It's absolutely fundamental that we have a track and trace system that works for everyone. And one of the themes, Mr. Mayor, I want to bring up, and I hope to speak on a few of the motions tonight, is inequality. The people who are most affected are the most vulnerable. They need these systems to be put in place and need to be effective and functioning properly. The private sector have had their chance to run the track and trace and have failed. Public money has gone into them systems, billions of pounds worth of public money, We now need to have that public money used by our public services, our heroic staff, our heroic public services who can deliver these systems and prevent the inequalities that are occurring. Coronavirus has laid bare the inequalities that we've got within our communities. People more affected in the communities that bear this inequality. So we've got communities that have been oppressed and put into inequality through austerity and through basically neoliberal politics. This coronavirus.
15 seconds left.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This coronavirus has laid that bare. We need these systems in place to protect our people. Please, please, please let us be able to deliver, track and trace through our council services. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Norbury. Thank you for that. And can I call on Councillor Pat Cleary?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would just like to highlight one particular concern around the response to the pandemic, and that's the amount of time it is taking to receive the results of a COVID test. So in Wirral, as we speak today, the average is 3 days. If tests were analysed locally instead of being shipped off to Milton Keynes or elsewhere, this figure could be 1 day on average or even less. Mr. Mayor, back in March, we were told this country did not have the laboratory capacity to match the success of Germany in achieving rapid testing times and all the advantages that flow from that in helping to track, isolate and contain the virus. 8 months later, the government has refused offers to use public health and university labs to bring down test waiting times and has failed to implement the regional approach that is so successful in countries like Germany. So, Mr. Mayor, we're used to public goods being privatised with profits draining into the hands of shareholders instead of being recycled for the public good. The pandemic has elevated this to a whole new level. A centralised system needlessly prioritising private corporations has cost lives and manifestly failed to control the pandemic. So, Mr. Mayor, we should not just be demanding adequate resources to support our residents and businesses through current and future restrictions. We should be just as vocal in demanding that local lab capacity is brought into play to slash the test waiting times, which is an essential element in controlling the virus and securing a return to normality. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Cleary. I now call on Councillor Tom Usher. Tom.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. When the NHS test and trace system was launched in late May, in the absence of a vaccine, this was, in the government's own words, a comprehensive test and trace system, and that would be our only way to ensure that we were able to see our families, go to work, and to stop our economy from crumbling. But it required a sacrifice from us all, and not an insignificant one. We said goodbye to family members and friends for the foreseeable, and some of us for good. Lost jobs posed great challenges to the physical and mental health of the nation. And through doing this, we bought the government time. Now, after pubs are ordered to close, extended families are forced to stop meeting, and intensive care beds fill up again fast, the government's sage scientific advisors have concluded NHS test and trace is not working. It became clear through the summer that the national system struggled with capacity in a way that local systems and teams didn't. And despite the emerging alternative to an overly centralised system of private firms, a system of local public health services who had a wealth of information and expertise to offer, the government did not change course. In every part of the country where greater local restrictions have become necessary, the rising cases and necessity to lock down once again has been precluded by the frustrated shouts of local leaders and public health officials asking for the resources and data they needed in order to save lives and livelihoods. We have huge disparities in the difference between national test and trace contacts and the ability of local teams to contact those those people who've been identified as positive. Leicester, Durham, Greater Manchester, Liverpool, Wirral. In every instance, they've been left unable to secure access to all the data to local cases, despite the fact that they had at their fingertips a system far better placed to get this virus under control than the national system. Local leaders have consistently and firmly stated that extra lockdown measures could have been avoided if they would have been more fully involved and had access to resources and data. Every single person in this country who stuck to the rules saw birthdays, weddings, anniversaries and funerals go by without them should be livid that the time they bought this government with their sacrifices have been wasted.
Councillor Russell, 15 more seconds. Sorry, 15 more seconds.
We are now set to make those sacrifices all over again. We need to start listening to our local leaders about what makes a good test and trace system, and only then can we get out of this mess. I support the motion. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. I don't think we've got any other people wanting to speak. No? Okay. Now,
Councillor Sullivan would like to speak, Mr. Mayor.
oh, sorry, I didn't see his hand. Okay. Councillor Mike Sullivan. Councillor Sullivan.
Got my microphone on. Councillor Jordan talked about individual responsibility. I'll give you 3 cases, Council, of 3 people's personal responsibility. Dominic Cummings driving 300 miles up to Durham with a COVID patient in his car and a small child. He was told he was using his initiative. Our Prime Minister holding a meeting in the Commons with 50 Tory MPs present, as Tom Usher just said, weddings, funerals and everything else, a maximum of 30. There's another personal responsibility. I'll give you the last one. Councillor Jordan mentioned alcoholism. Matt Hancock, our health minister, sitting in the House of Commons with his glasses of red wine, knocking it back at 10:30, 11:15, when everybody else in the country had a curfew on the pubs. There's 3 instances of personal responsibility. We've got a track and trace system which is not fit for purpose. There's a care home in Pensby, 74 staff. 70 tests went off 3 weeks ago. The staff are being tested every week for obvious reasons. The system went down and not one of those 70 tests came back. Again, I call that corporate responsibility. We've got a government at the moment which is running as an autocracy. There's no scrutiny in Parliament and they're bringing in draconian measures day after day. £1,000 fine, £10,000 fine. What about Dominic Cummings, our Prime Minister, and Matt Hancock? The National Health Service is in a mess. It's not fit for purpose. We've got a welfare state which this government has stripped, and it's not fit for purpose. What is it? 67% they've deemed to pay, but people don't pay 67% of the rent. They don't pay 67% at the supermarket. So let's have some accountability, please. People out there haven't got a I eat, sleep and drink all this stuff. There's people out there who haven't got a clue what the 3-tier system is. They don't understand. This government haven't got the faintest idea. And I'll tell you something else, Mr. Mayor. On the 31st of December, we leave the European Union, the transition period. It's going to be an absolute shambles.
Councillor Sullivan, 15 more seconds.
To a halt. I'll finish now, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
The Royal in Liverpool's up to 80% capacity of beds already, and we're only in October. And Mr. Mayor, what I'd like to do, we should have a special council meeting to discuss the coronavirus. This virus is going nowhere. And anyone who thinks there's a vaccine around the corner is living in cloud cuckoo land.
Mike, that's it.
Let's have a council meeting where we discuss this COVID crisis, because the government is certainly not handling it. And I'm supporting both motions. And thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I took an extra couple of minutes there because my battery went flat at the last meeting.
All right.
So you owed me 2 minutes.
Okay,
you owed
Councillor.
me 2 minutes.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you. Right, I've got two more people. Councillor David Burgess-Joyce, first of all. David?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I won't be very long, I can assure you on this. I'm just a little bit confused, and I know people think I do get confused quite quickly, but just bear with me. Councillor Williamson points out that obviously the government's terrible, but finishes off in a circuitous route by telling us that she's very happy for the money that they've given to her. Julie McManus mentions that she wants things to be open. Tony Norbury suggests that he wants the advice from SAGE to be followed and everything to be closed. Tom Usher mentions that he and us have bought the government some time. Well, in fairness, they are trying their best to get a vaccine, which would obviously help. And with the greatest respect to Mike, I'm not quite sure what he was referring to, but I'm just a bit curious as to what the Labour Party's view is. Is it open? Is it closed? Is it following Keir Starmer, who doesn't seem to, in fairness, disagree with the Prime Minister? Or is it Steve Rotherham, who's very, very happy to take any money that the government forwards his way? I'd just genuinely like to know an answer on that one. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Right.
You're definitely confused, David.
Okay, Councillor Gillian Wood. Gillian?
Well, I don't think I'm going to answer Councillor Burgess-Joyce's comments. I thought I needed to speak after Councillor Jordan and what she said and talked about responsibility. We all, as local councillors, have the interests of residents and businesses here. We know that decisions have to be taken and decisions have to be made. But it really, really upsets me when you see in news reports today and you're talking about money and you see that, governments used to have this policy about keeping us well, which is 5 a day, have 5 a day. But Michael Gove today is supporting and defending independent consultants such as Dido Harding having 7 a day, 7k a day. So I really think that this is really going off track. I think that we really need to get back onto the point of what this motion's all about, and I support it.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Right, Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to add some thoughts similar to Councillor Wood about responsibility. The government told us not to see our families. They told us not to connect with isolated loved ones. They told us not to congregate, and we didn't. The government told workers, though, stack supermarket shelves, staff the hospitals, deliver takeaways, get food to the people, and they did. And let's remember, this is not just one particular demographic. This is older workers and younger workers. This was everyone. Then they told us, you've got to help the economy, go out, eat out and help out, and people did. They told students, go to university, but stay isolated, stay away from your families, pay astronomical rents, and they absolutely did. The people have played their parts, not just older people, not just younger people, the entire community. People have banded together. The government has the audacity to blame the people, and it is absolutely for shame. I support this motion, and the people have been let down. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Frost. Right, I've got one more. I will come back to that, Councillor Norbury. I've got Councillor Yvonne Nolan. Councillor Nolan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I do come back to support this motion and take grave issue with Councillor Burgess-Joyce, who appears to want to divert criticism of this government. In fact, there is no way that you can divert this criticism. It is clear from day one that the handling of this virus has been totally incompetent by this government. And yes, of course, in defence of local people who are the ones who will suffer, despite, as Councillor Frost says, doing everything they've been asked to do, they're the ones who will suffer. They're the ones whose wages will either not be paid at all or paid at a reduced rate. So yes, of course, the Metro Mayor will accept whatever money is offered by this government. Heaven knows This government owes us an absolute fortune as a council. So I will absolutely support the fact that we will take whatever money is on offer, and however much it is, unless it's the £250 million that's owed to us, it's not enough. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, and Councillor Jeff Green.
Press all the right buttons. Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just bringing us back to the notice of motion and the amendment. Just looking through it, and while I'm certainly keen to support it, first of all, it wishes the success of the government in tackling the pandemic. It references that there's always going to be a fight against the second wave. It pays tribute to the work of all those that have been involved in that fight. And let's not forget, we did start from a low base. We should have been better prepared, it could be argued, but let's start from a low base to the point at which the testing regime is now out. It recognises the need for local public health involvement, and as I understand, the excellent agreement that Jeanette and Steve Rotherham have agreed with the government does give significant extra resources for that track and trace. And just by the way, according to the press release, we're using a private company to operate it, the Contact Company. And it also talks about the need for additional sums from the government in order to support local businesses that are impacted by the tighter controls. And again, as I understand it, thanks to Councillor Williamson and Steve Rotherham, that and the people from the Cabinet Office, that money has been forthcoming. So I think for all those reasons, I think it was a good notice of motion, and the point made by Phil Gilchrist in the amendment were very sound too. I think work is ongoing. I think we all need to, as I think Jeanette mentioned, that we all need to work together to fight this particular pandemic and make sure that if we can, that tier 3 works. And yes, there's some personal responsibility in there. And yes, there are, we've seen the pictures of groups and demonstrations and all the rest of it, which strike me as being a bit irresponsible, I have to tell you. So we all need to do that, and government needs to do their bit too. And I'm sure, knowing Jeanette and Steve Rotherham, etc., that we will continue to make the case for the support that we need in order to ensure that these regional approaches actually work. And I would just point out that, Macron, a whole range of leaders across Europe are battling the second wave, and they do seem to be doing rather similar things to what it is that we're doing. So that seems to be the approach that the public health officials do. And the other thing I would just say, I get a little tedious. I will bring my remarks to an end, Mr. Mayor. I do get a bit fed up when people criticise the NHS being not fit for purpose, etc. I think the NHS through this has been absolutely remarkable, and we should admire our NHS and what it's achieved. People didn't think it could cope, and it did.
Jeff,
it's been absolutely magnificent, and that's why, Mr. Mayor, I will be supporting the notice of motion this evening.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Jeff. Right, we've got one more. Councillor Gardner. Andrew.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had no intention to speak to this, but I'm somewhat puzzled by the Labour group's approach to this, really. In a time when we should be pulling together, they seem to be, pulling apart and wishing to make, points against the government, picking out on individuals, and we've all had a really difficult time. There is a second wave. There was always going to be a second wave, and there will be a third wave. That's what viruses do. That can't be helped, and all over Europe it's the same. It's got an article up here. UK, France, Netherlands, Spain, Portugal, Czech Republic all unveiled new restrictions last week. Italy have unveiled new restrictions today. So I fail to see how criticising the government at this time, when, you know, I don't understand what the motive is, or what you hope to achieve by criticising the government, who's obviously doing its best and in very difficult circumstances around the issues that are here with public health, with the economy and civil liberties. So there's three distinct pillars that they have to address. And of course, every government will do it slightly differently. And you can pick the bones out of that as you wish, and you can point to other countries that might have had slightly better infection rates or death rates, but then you look at the civil liberty angle, and we're all different and we're all trying. And I would pay credit to the council leader for her engagement with the government, and for the Metro Mayor, who I've not always been that kind to, frankly, for engaging with the government when we look at the mess that is Manchester, where public health is now on the back burner there over the economy. So I'm somewhat at a loss, but we will be voting for this motion and the amendment tonight. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Gordon. Vic, can I just ask, Vicky, I've had a little note from Councillor Norbury of point of order, because he's been mentioned in his speech. Can you direct me here?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. A member who's spoken on a motion once may not speak again. They can make a personal explanation where maybe part of their previous comments have been misunderstood, but just simply because they are named, they don't have a right of response.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Okay, I'm going to move on then on to thank you. I think everyone's had a good opportunity to have a say in the matter. I'm now going on to Councillor Phil Gilchrist to exercise his right to speak as seconder of the original motion. 3 minutes, Phil.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll try and do everything that he's doing in that time. Councillor Gardner mentioned Manchester. I have a family member who works in Manchester. They have that part of Manchester a rate of 617 for 100,000, which is way above ours. So it's all in our interest to get a system that is trusted and working right. Councillor Burgess-Joyce mentioned money, and members have thanked the leader and the regional mayor for negotiating with the government. Those negotiations have been detailed and precise, securing for us money that we needed. And I believe that as things last over time, we will need further phases still. Councillor Sullivan referred to the activities of Mr. Cummings, and I think that was the point at which trust amongst the public began to wane. And it's our job as local members to get a system that is trusted. Councillor McManus referred to some of the strange inconsistencies in the system between gyms and soft play areas. There is a review sunset clause in these powers in a month. We need to work actively to find agreement on how we can open facilities safely for the public in the need of exercise. Councillor Jordan talked about vaccine, but that might be some time off. I hope it's sooner rather than later. But she stressed the stress and worry that health service staff have and the care home staff have day-to-day living with this, and we owe them a tribute for all that they have been doing to help our loved ones. Councillor Norbury talked about trust and scientific advice and test and trace. Well, in today's Times, there was an article entitled, on page 25, Time to Stop the Coronavirus Gravy Train, written by a correspondent. I'd recommend that to all members, because the situation is that businesses have been making a lot of money out of this gravy train through a system that didn't really involve much tendering. And as Councillor Cleary rightly pointed out, there are facilities in universities that could well be brought in. And as Councillor Usher touched on capacity. But one thing that was perhaps misunderstood, that there is an NHS service that it is branded, because there are private contractors who have branded it with the NHS, and the fault is not that of NHS staff, it is of those companies that have taken on the work. Now, our local response, as has been set out today in a press release, is to have an arrangement with the local company. It is to publish data so that our residents can see exactly what's going on, almost day by day. Our citizens, our people need confidence, and we need a system that is respected and that works. And that's what this council needs to make sure is in place and remains in place throughout this terrible time that we face. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Spot on time. Thank you, Councillor Gilchrist. Thank you. Right. Councillor Williamson, do you wish to exercise your right of reply as proposer of the original motion? If so, 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll try and keep this brief. I'll address some of the comments. Councillor Burgess-Joyce, you said I said the government were terrible. I'd appreciate it if you could find that clip of this meeting for me and send it on. Councillor Jordan, you talk about personal responsibility. Where's the government responsibility here to look after its citizens and its businesses? They deserve clarity. They deserve financial support. They deserve clear messages. And moreover, they deserve a government who are not hypocritical, who have stood by Dominic Cummings in the face of his outrageous actions, which have let the country down. And that's exactly right. That's when things started to unravel. Councillor Gardner, I'd like to just say that working together does not and will not stop me from criticising your government when I see fit. And I would be personally flabbergasted if I thought that behind the scenes you were not taking a critical view. This has been handled abysmally by Boris Johnson. Okay? I'd just like to say that I will go and I will demand additional funding for this council. And I think to be veiled criticism that I have done that and accepted that additional support is bizarre, if I'm being honest. And just lastly, I'd like to say that whilst I've passed on my personal condolences to Mayor Anderson about his brother, I'm not entirely comfortable with that tragedy being discussed in the middle of a political debate in this council. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Williamson. Right, we will now move to the vote on the substantive motion. Vicky, would you like to undertake a roll call again?
Councillor Anderson?
Tom Anderson, for.
Councillor Berry?
Councillor Berry, for.
Councillor Bird?
Councillor Bird, for.
Councillor Brame?
Alan Brayton, for.
Councillor Burgess-Joyce?
Councillor Burgess-Joyce, for.
Councillor Cameron?
Helen Cameron, for.
Councillor Cannon?
Councillor Cannon, for.
Councillor Carabea?
Councillor Carabea, for.
Councillor Cleary?
Pat Cleary, for.
Councillor Clements?
Councillor Clements, for.
Councillor Collins?
Councillor Collins, for.
Councillor Cook?
Councillor Chris Cook, for.
Councillor Corkill?
Andy Corkill, for.
Councillor Cottier?
Andy Cottier, for.
Councillor Cox?
For.
Councillor George Davis?
For.
Councillor Fawkes?
Councillor Steve Fawkes, for.
Councillor Frost?
Councillor Sam Frost, for.
Councillor Gardner?
Councillor Andrew Gardner, for.
Councillor Gilchrist?
Councillor Phil Gilchrist, for. Thank you.
Councillor Greenie?
Councillor Carl Greenie, for.
Councillor Green?
Councillor Jeff Green, for.
Councillor Gray?
Councillor Gray, for.
Councillor Paul Hayes?
For.
Councillor Steve Hayes?
Steve Hayes, for.
Councillor Andrew Hodson?
Andrew Hodson, for.
Councillor Kathy Hodson?
Councillor Catherine Hodson, for.
Councillor Johnson? Councillor Jenny Johnson, for. Councillor Adrian Jones?
Councillor Adrian Jones, for.
Councillor Chris Jones?
Chris Jones, for.
Councillor Tony Jones?
Councillor Tony Jones, for.
Councillor Jordan?
Councillor Mary Jordan, for.
Councillor Kelly.
Stuart Kelly 4.
Councillor Kenny.
Councillor Brian Kenny 4. Thank you.
Councillor Leach.
Councillor Anita Leach 4.
Councillor Lewis.
Ian Lewis voting for.
Councillor McLaughlin.
Maureen McLaughlin 4.
Councillor McManus.
Julie McManus 4.
Councillor Mitchell.
Councillor Dave Mitchell 4.
Councillor Muspratt.
Councillor Muspratt 4.
Councillor Nolan.
Councillor Nolan 4.
Councillor Norbury.
Councillor Norbury 4. Vicky Cheers.
Councillor Povell.
Councillor Cherry Povell 4.
Councillor Rennie.
Councillor Leslie Rennie 4.
Councillor Robinson.
Councillor Robinson 4.
Councillor Rowlands.
Councillor Rowlands 4.
Councillor Smith.
Abstain.
Councillor Spur.
Sarah Spore 4.
Councillor Spriggs.
Councillor Spriggs 4.
Councillor Stewart.
Councillor Paul Stewart 4.
Councillor Sullivan.
Mike Sullivan 4.
Councillor Usher.
Councillor Rusher 4.
Councillor Walsh.
Councillor Joe Walsh 4.
Councillor Whittingham.
4.
Councillor Williams, Irene Williams.
Councillor Irene Williams 4.
Councillor Jerry Williams.
4.
Councillor Steve Williams.
Councillor Steve Williams 4.
Councillor Williamson.
4.
Councillor Wood.
4.
Councillor Wright.
Councillor Wright. 4.
Thank you. I think that's 59,
Yep.
4 and 1 abstention, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you very much. So that's been agreed. Okay, I did mention at the beginning of the meeting that we would have a 10-minute comfort break around 7:30 to 8 o'clock, and I think we can do that now. So 10-minute break for everyone. Okay.
We're live.
Okay. Okay, welcome back, councillors, and we'll now move on to motion 2, which is protecting the public say in the planning system. I now invite Councillor Stuart Kelly and Dave Mitchell to move and second their motions. Councillor Kelly.
So move, Mr. Mayor.
Right, Councillor Mitchell.
So seconded, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, Councillor Kelly, you now have 5 minutes to speak to your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, there's a lot going on in the country at the moment, a lot for national and local politicians, public sector workers and people to grapple with. But into this mix, we now have a almost inexplicable desire from the government to rip up the current planning system in this country and replace it with some sort of opaque zoning system, with the added possibility that local accountability and rights will also be thrown out of the window. Mr. Mayor, the government began 2 consultations on planning. The first consultation, entitled Changes to the Current Planning System, has closed, and I commend the Council's response to it, particularly on the issue of the changes to the housing algorithm and the small sites threshold for affordable housing contributions, both of which would have had very negative impacts on Wirral. We weren't alone in asking government to think again on these issues. In a debate in the House of Commons, no less a figure than former Prime Minister Theresa May told the Minister that she would have thought the government might have abandoned algorithms by now, following the O and A level debacle. She also correctly points out that the problem with the algorithm on housing numbers is that it doesn't doesn't guarantee the building of a single extra home. Mr. Mayor, even Chris Grayling, a man not unknown to failing policies and projects, was moved to speak out against the white paper and warned the government of impending disaster if it pressed on. Let's not forget the linked second consultation entitled Planning for the Future, which closes at the end of the month. The British planning system is a very strange beast, with policies, procedures and processes carefully built up and developed over the past 70 years or more, which seek to balance the interests of objectors, of applicants, and of local people and developers. It's developed numerous checks and balances that hang together in a very intricate way, and which allow for local input and national oversight. Trip this all up in the hope of starting again is folly in the extreme. I've set out the comments of just two organisations to these proposals in the motion, the British Architects and the Town and Country Planning Association. The association, I think, nailed the key objection as the removal of democratic oversight, but also highlight areas where the current system can and should be improved when they point to the contribution planning should be making to improve health and well-being and tackling climate change. The existing system is not perfect, this is true. A system that can allow HMO slums to pop up under permitted development rights must obviously have room to improve, to name just one bugbear of mine. But this calls for more local control, not less, as is being proposed. Mr. Mayor, I hope we can continue the spirit of unanimity on this issue tonight. Certainly the Conservative-controlled LGA has set its face against this, and I'm aware that there is general disquiet amongst Conservative politicians up and down the country. I hope that Council do respond to this second consultation in good time. I've chosen the route of a motion to Council in order to guide the hand of our officers in preparing the response. It's not possible within the timescales of the consultation to ask a policy or a programme committee to consider the implications of the consultation before it closes. I would therefore, Mr. Mayor, ask the Council to approve this motion tonight. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Kelly. Right, we'll now move on to debate. Are there any speakers? If so, you have 3 minutes to address the Council. So does anyone like to speak? Yes, I've got one. It's Councillor Steve Faggs. Steve?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, thank you for allowing me to speak. This legislation is something that I think we can all oppose for many, many reasons, but I think the primary reason, as Stuart outlays, is this algorithm actually increases the amount of houses to 1,500 we would have to find per as part of the local plan. And as you know, this has been really tough debate with us to get it down to the current level that's in our local plan. So I pay credit to Anita Leach and all the leaders who've come together to actually get our local plan. And hopefully we will get this local plan through before this abhorrent piece of legislation puts even more pressure on our beloved and valuable green belt. There's other reasons for opposing this white paper. One primary reason is that it attempts on a whole host of levels to remove the democratic right of people to become involved in the planning process. And those of us who sit on the planning committee know how difficult that is. There's a misunderstanding of what you can and can't do on planning, but nevertheless, people turn up in their large numbers, have get involved and have a real say in what the decisions are. This removes democratic rights on many, many levels. The other thing I would actually say, it is actually a detriment for one of our main aims in this authority, and that's to increase the numbers of social housing. It does absolutely nothing within its legislation to encourage the building of social houses. It does exactly the opposite. And for all those reasons, I think the notice of motion is well timed. I don't think they're going to listen to Labour MPs. I don't think they're going to listen to opposition MPs. But the one thing that can unsteady the government's nerve is if enough Conservatives and enough Conservative MPs get together, and there's been quite a rebellion within the Conservative Party, and I hope our local Conservatives encourage that rebellion to get some real changes in this legislation. This was part of Dominic Cummings' master plan, isn't it? It was known as the bonfire of regulations. Well, we know how well Dominic Cummings respects regulations and the rule of law. So I would urge everyone in this chamber to use whatever methods they can to get beneficial changes to this white paper before it becomes law. This is a bad piece of legislation, and bad legislation should be stopped. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Fast. Can I have Councillor Tony Norbury? Tony.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I agree with what Steve Folkes is saying and the movers of the motion regarding it's a bad piece of legislation. The first piece of legislation that came out of the Town and the Town and Country Planning Act in 1947, Mr. Silkin, who actually moved the Labour motion on this, said this Town Planning and Country Planning Act will give human happiness, security and culture, will play a greater part in social and economic life than ever before. And that's because the Town and Country Planning Act democratised planning for the first time in this country. People of communities could choose what was built or have a say in what was built in their own communities, and we got beautiful council estates like the Woodchurch estate came off the back of that. This Tory government with this new white paper are attempting to unravel that, and Steve's right in what he says. There's no provision in it at all for social housing, so we won't see beautiful estates like the Woodchurch estate being built, creating well-being for people, creating beauty for people, creating security for people and creating culture for people, like Mr. Silkin said back in 1947. As we've got at the moment, we don't want houses, we want homes. Houses are being used as a commodity to sell and buy on the stock market to make profit, for landlords to make profit, for developers. We want homes. We don't want bricks. We want homes. Homes for people. People are struggling at the moment, and I'm bringing that inequality, the inequality thread that's running right the way through everything I'm saying tonight. Bad housing, bad planning creates inequality. Inequality in our communities that can least afford it. People are being affected by so many different things at the moment that's creating more and more inequality. People forced to choose between paying the bills and eating because they're paying high extortionate rents in rented accommodation because the homes that they desire are not being built. We should be funding our planning system on the need to reduce inequalities in our communities. I will be voting for this motion because of what I've said. Cheers, Mr. Mayor.
Well, thank you, Tony. Within the time. Brilliant. Thank you. Councillor Adrian Jones. Adrian.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, first I'd like to say I agree with what Steve has said and Tony. I think that the post-war consensus ended pretty abruptly with the 1979 general election, and Parker-Morris house building standards were abolished the following year under the Conservative government that had just been elected. But Seacombe councillors have repeatedly opposed what we believe is today's creation of tomorrow's potential slums, which the mover correctly referred to. Our objections have been raised in the knowledge that they would in any case risk a defeated appeal. But we raised them irrespective because we are determined to bring the drive to slumification, that is a word that appears in dictionaries now, to public attention. Now, the driving force for this social regression, they're astronomical house prices and the decline of council housing, so that young people who only one generation ago could have aspired to be homeowners, certainly within my lifetime, my young lifetime, it was possible to get a 90% or even 100% mortgage. That can't happen now. And that was the prices you could stint to actually pay to buy a house. They're not affordable now. That's just a fake title that's attached to them. There are some very responsible private landlords, and to avoid doubt, we have no quarrel with them. But our objection is to the speculative conversion of former shops and family homes into so-called units where many times the intended number of people are crowded into wholly unsuited buildings, often in streets separated by alleys, with wheelie bins for several tenants and not enough car parking. We have absolutely excellent not-for-profit social housing providers. We've got no, they're doing very well. But a huge number of former council houses have entered the private sector rented market. And meanwhile, while all this is happening, conversions of former shops and residential family homes into crowded bed sitting rooms and so-called units, it goes ahead. And this motion seeks to resist measures that are set to make matters far worse by a government whose proposals will bring no comfort to the homeless and those on average incomes or below, but would be a shark's charter for speculators. Councillors, I encourage you all to support the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Thank you. Councillor Wendy Clements. Wendy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. These consultations have raised very many concerns, and I'm aware of that because an awful lot of people who are local to me have copied me into their response to these national consultations, which aren't legislation, and their consultations are good things, I think. These local people, Mr. Mayor, are absolutely passionate about keeping Wirral's green belt, but at the same time, getting housing which is fit for purpose for the needs of all the people of Wirral. They don't want to see Wirral forced to build more homes than it needs, but it does. They do want to see homes which fit those needs. Mr. Mayor, I think that planning does, like many other parts of life, need to evolve and change, and debate is a good thing as people explore and think about different ways, and we've heard some very cogent arguments. We do need to make sure that we make enough homes for local people to live in the right place. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Clem. Councillor Pat Cleary.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And in speaking in favour of this motion, it seems to be that the government is successfully uniting almost everybody in opposition to this white paper. As the proposer said, the current system is not perfect. I would certainly endorse that. It's by no means perfect, but it's pretty clear that these proposals would make it significantly worse. The white paper is not fit for purpose. It should be torn up. The government should start again, and they should adopt a proper evidence-based approach to changes to the planning system, which are needed, but we don't need the kind of changes that are being proposed in this white paper. I'd also like to endorse the comments of Adrian Jones around HMOs. This is a really serious concern and a growing concern. I see more and more planning applications for houses of multiple occupation in my own ward. The experience over recent years is extremely negative, and it looks like it's going to get worse based on the flow of applications that is coming in. So that is a really serious concern. The main point I just wanted to make was that a system as outlined in this white paper, which puts even more emphasis on growth ahead of quality of life, that makes it all the more important that our new local plan is fully fit for purpose. And it must offset as best as possible the laissez-faire approach of government. And especially important will be our local design code, which must address the climate emergency, for example, through zero carbon building, transport design, building waste, and also packaging and materials minimization. So it's down to us to establish Wirral as a centre of excellence for zero carbon construction and design and not fall into the trap of a race to the bottom, lowest common denominator approach, which will condemn us to third-rate development and regeneration. We're fortunate, Mr. Mayor, that we have many, many talented officers in this authority that understand this, but they will need the backup of the politicians. We need to provide them with the political support to make sure that we do the very best we can in spite of government legislation to ensure that our future developments are truly fit for purpose and fit for the climate emergency. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Cleary. And I'll call on Councillor Anita Leach. Anita.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Kelly mentioned the 1 million homes across the country not started. I would like to advise Council that Wirral Borough Council does follow up on planning applications approved and seek to work with developers in order to bring them forward. As councillors will be aware, we have ensured that every member in this chamber has had the opportunity to comment on the consultation changes to the current planning system. I can assure Council that we will respond in good time to the second consultation, the White Paper Planning for the Future. I can further ensure Council that we will be bringing forward the draft local plan to avoid the 1,500 home increase alluded to by Councillor Foulkes. I agree houses should be fit for purpose. I agree with the decision of full council for urban regeneration on a brownfield first approach. I welcome the motion and I will be supporting it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Leach. And I'll call on Councillor Ian Lewis. Ian.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for the opportunity to speak on this debate that has been rightly called by Councillor Stuart Kelly. Mr. Mayor, it is a matter for debate as to how much control is held by the government and how much control is held by local authorities. Indeed, many of us, Mr. Mayor, who have longer memories can remember the previous Labour government's attempts to strip wholesale planning controls away from local councils and to create instead regional spatial strategies. That's one of the things that this government has done by scrapping them altogether. Mr. Mayor, I cannot remember a planning bill of any government that hasn't seen concerns raised by councils and by campaigners during the consultation. The important thing is that the consultation is meaningful, that it is genuine, and that people listen to it. Mr. Mayor, and finally, the threat that has been referred to by some colleagues to Wirral's Greenbelt comes not from this planning bill. The threat to our Greenbelt comes from this council's failure for 14 years to come up with a plan to protect it. And Mr. Mayor, like Councillor Kelly, if we cannot rely on councils to deal with issues such as HMOs, then who can we rely on? It cannot be right that people in this country, the quality of their houses and their homes is a postcode lottery, depending on whether their council has got its act together, or in the case of Wirral on this issue, that we have not. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Lewis. Councillor Chris Carubia. Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm really interested in listening to what everybody's been saying on this issue, and there's been quite a lot of comments that I've agreed with and some that I'm not so sure about. This is not my area of expertise at all, but some of the questions or some of the issues that concern me are the statements of fit for purpose and affordable housing. I mean, I don't think anybody's building any affordable housing. I don't even know what how they work out this affordable business, because it certainly isn't affordable to any of my residents. But with the question of overcrowding that Councillor Jones mentioned about in Seacombe slums that were being created, it's not just that. In my own ward here, literally a stone's throw from me, they want to build 106 houses in a field that is totally over populated. The local residents agree houses will be built there, just not that huge number, which adds to traffic issues and everything else. And my concern with this paper, and why I'll certainly be voting for this, is that it's taken away the opportunity for residents to voice their objections. And that's what I object to. The fact that they will not have their say and it will be imposed on them whether they like it or not. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Right, I think everyone I've seen his hand went up, or I got notification of has had his say. Yes, okay. So now we'll move on to the seconder of the motion. Councillor Mitchell, you now have up to 3 minutes to speak to the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll be as brief as possible. Most of the points I were going to raise in my seconding of this have been mentioned by other members. I can whiz through them as quickly as this. HMOs, lack of social housing, homes fit for purpose, and that is the thing that's most important, fit for purpose. We've seen a groundswell against this white paper. It's starting to gain momentum now, because not only local councils are objecting to this, the local governments association are objecting against this, and we've seen quite a large number of Conservative members of Parliament objecting against this. The whole issue comes back to the ability of local democracy and the people be able to live and discuss what the type of area that they would like to see in their own particular surroundings. I'll finish there. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Mitchell. Right, now the right of reply. Councillor Kelly, you now have up to 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I am grateful to those members that have spoken and spoken from their different perspectives in support. I entirely acknowledge that the current planning system isn't perfect, and understand exactly what Councillor Jones was talking about in terms of HMOs and the extension of permitted developments, which was the government's last foray, if you were, into altering the way the planning system works. Pat Cleary and Ian Lewis in particular, I know, has worked very hard with officers, myself and George Davis and Stuart Whittingham latterly to try and get a grip on the quality of housing, particularly in the HMO area. I'm particularly grateful for the support of Steve Fowkes, former chair of the Planning Committee, currently vice chair, and of course of Anita Leach, who's the former cabinet member and continues to chair the local plan group. And I also know that Councillor Leach has put in place some member briefings on the impact of this white paper. So hopefully that will also inform, lead to further debate and inform the response that we give. Finally, Mr. Mayor, in terms of what Wendy Clements and Steve Fowkes will also say, Steve Fowkes is entirely right. Of course, the government probably won't listen very, very carefully to what opposition MPs say. Hopefully it will listen to its own MPs, so that can't be necessarily counted on. But I received an email today, and I know that Councillor Leach has replied. I think maybe all members have received the email. It's a response to the consultation by the Airby, Thurston, Pensby Amenity Society. It's very detailed. It picks up some work by the Wirral Green Space Alliance as well. I think if we can, as members, in our own patches, in contact with amenity groups and conservation area committees and others, if we can encourage them, that level of people to take an interest in the consultation, to get them to log on and to give their views, I think that would carry quite a bit of weight with the government. The council is entitled to its response, and I hope that we can start that response by passing this notice of motion. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Kelly. Right, there be no further speakers. I will now move to the vote. Now, we can either do this by assent or roll call by Vicky Shaw. So,
or assent, surely.
Assent?
Yes, I agree.
Yes. Any objection?
Assent.
Read.
Yeah, yes, I don't hear any. Say not. Okay, we'll agree that by assent then. Thank you, everyone. Okay, we move on to motion 3, which is pedestrian safety. Right, I understand that in accordance with Standing Order 15.8, Councillors Cleary and Cook wished to withdraw their motion. I'm now going to ask those councillors to confirm that this is the case. Councillor Cleary?
Yes, indeed, Mr. Mayor. Can I just say that since our motion was submitted, we have had an assurance that the development of an updated road safety plan, including a response to the issues raised in our motion, will be incorporated into the work programme of the Environment, Climate Emergency and Transport Committee.
Okay.
And these have been added to the work programme as included in the agenda for the first meeting of the committee this Thursday. So as such, we are content for the time being to proceed on this basis and are therefore withdrawing this motion from tonight's agenda.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Cook, is that the same?
Yes, I confirm what Councillor Pat Cleary has just said. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Do any members not consent to the withdrawal of the motion? If so, indicate in the chat facility now. Otherwise, I will move on to the next motion. Okay, I'll move on to motion 4. Cross-party unity on the climate crisis. I will now invite councillors Elizabeth Gray, Liz Gray and Pat Cleary to move and second the motions at page 10 of the summons. Councillor Gray, can you propose the motion, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In July...
Can you propose the motion?
Oh, sorry, yes, sorry, propose. Sorry, Mr. Mayor.
My fault. Councillor Cleary, can you second the motion?
Yes, seconded, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gray, you now have 5 minutes to speak to your motion. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In July 2019, we voted unanimously to declare an environment and climate emergency, to acknowledge that we are facing a biodiversity crisis and the breakdown of a habitable global climate. In declaring these emergencies, we sent a message to our residents and beyond that we will do all we can to protect them and fight the multiple challenges of unnatural global heating and the devastation of the natural world with species loss, which could leave our planet potentially bereft of life. However, since then, too few of us have shown any real understanding of the disasters we face. Some of us are not showing any real support for the changes we must make to our often destructive lifestyles. Still, the short-term gain of the next local election comes before the long-term needs of our residents. The things we need to do to ensure their protection from flooding, from air pollution, from the obesity crisis, from poor road safety are ignored, and from species extinction and climate change, at times denied, all to generate anti-change votes in the May elections. Change is difficult, but often essential. When it comes to biodiversity loss and the climate emergency, change could be life-saving. Our residents can see the difference between a council working together to improve their life chances and protect them from existential threats, and elected members launching small-minded local campaigns of fear. Our residents want to be informed about the real long-term threats and how best we can deal with them. Campaigns of misinformation, ignoring the bigger picture, are actually campaigns against the well-being of our residents. As the global crisis unfolds, and as the environment continues to become top of the agenda for each demographic group, we will be increasingly, and quite rightly, judged at the ballot box for how seriously we have been taking the climate emergency and the destruction of nature. We need to work together now. We've got so little time to get this right. If we work together to promote the natural world, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and reap the benefits of healthier, happier lives that come with that, then it is possible we can achieve the pledges we made in July 2019. If some of us continue to work against the change needed, such as active travel and the restoration of nature, then we will be letting our residents down. We will have misled them in July 2019 when we suggested we would protect them. I urge all members to vote now to work together to combat loss of nature and the climate emergency for the sake of our residents. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Gray. Thank you. Right, we now move on to the debate, and I'll be asking for speakers if you wish, and you will have 3 minutes to address the council. So if you wish to indicate, anyone? Right, you just take some names first. Right, Councillor Steve Hayes. Steve?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, this motion is one I would love to think is a no-brainer. It does not take a great deal of brain power to accept the fact that climate change is real, with the devastation that it's already beginning to have on our planet. We once called it freak weather, but it is now the norm, and sadly it's going to get much worse. And it's not just climate breakdown. As mentioned, the destruction of our planet with the changes in climate is also affecting biodiversity in a disastrous manner. Biodiversity is lost due to the changing climate, but also the causes of that. What affects the climate also affects biodiversity as well. So we have a two-pronged attack on a biodiversity and all life on our planet. We need the balance of nature. We need biodiversity. I genuinely believe we're on the road to extinction if we do not start to make real sacrifices soon of our lifestyle choices. However, what we do right now in an attempt to mitigate the future life change and effects the climate will bring will not stop things getting worse than it is now, but we can, however, slow this breakdown. If we make sacrifices now, generations after us may see the benefits and the climate may recover to a point, but the tipping point, according to many climate scientists, is very close now. Once we get to the cliff edge, there's no going back. We have to do much better, but we also have to win the hearts and mind of others who also have to accept big sacrifices. And another huge problem we have to overcome is that we have to combat the social media fake news syndrome virus, and we cannot do it with poor examples set by any of us. Social media is producing a social dilemma where we are finding opposing views amplified and subsequently reinforced, and it's destroying the fabric of science-based evidence. Making a political stand against something which is good for our planet for simply party political gain would be short-sighted, and I believe we all have to work together politically. We have to hold firm against the shouts of doubters and show political will that we are united across all parties against those who still don't understand the dire situation we're all in. I believe all political parties need to unite to survive this existential crisis. Climate damage to life is a crisis that has no regard for political affiliation, and it will only be countered by following the science. We need to work together within our new committees with a common goal, with saving nature high on every agenda. I fully support the motion. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Hayes, and thank you for staying within the time. Councillor Cox.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have no intentions of speaking to this this evening, but I think I probably need to put my 2 pence worth in. As per usual, the actual motion, there is nothing in there whatsoever that is particularly controversial, and I can't see any reason why I can't back it. The idea of us all working together, which we have proven that we can actually do, is the most sensible approach to climate change. What I will say, and this touches on what, it's what Councillor Gray was talking about there, and she kind of conflated quite a lot of things there with which are not actually really mentioned within the notice of motion. The one thing I will say is this: I think people are taking, we are taking climate change serious. I think the declaration in 2019 is an indicator of that. However, any changes that need to be made, they need to be made in conjunction in conjunction with the voters, with the residents of the Wirral, not by diktat. And this is what the issue is. And this has been shown time and time again, the issue of the beach in my ward. I think the ongoing one, which I think Councillor Gray was alluding to without saying it, which is probably the soon to be, hopefully not soon to be imposed cycle lanes, which people have are clearly up in arms about, all the way from Birkenhead right the way through Wallasey. And the point is this: active travel, whilst all well and good, particularly during the summer, and I'm sure people got on the bike and did the best that they could. Is it actually sustainable throughout winter months, in the dark months when it's freezing cold and people perhaps work in an office, when they get there they're going to be soaking wet? It's not going to happen. We've got to be absolutely realistic. But if we are to try to convert people to active travel from cars, it has to be by consensus. And again, I'll say it again, not by totalitarianism, not by diktat. We work with people, we explain why they should be looking at carrying out as many of their shorter journeys as they possibly can, by either foot, by bike, whatever it may be. But we don't force them off the road and out of cars. And if that's the pragmatic approach, and I'm more than happy to back that. And you will all have seen my reply to the former leader of the council with regards to the aerospace industry and the car industry, of which I will declare an interest. There's other people who would have to declare an interest because their family work in the same place as me, if they choose to speak. The point is, if we are genuinely trying to push people...
15 seconds.
Bear with me one minute, Mr. Mayor, and I'll wind up. If we are genuinely trying to push people out of vehicles altogether, then come clean and actually say it to the people, say it to the public. That's what you're trying to do. If we want to work with the general public and ask them politely to move into active travel, let's go for that. This is about, it's about democracy, Mr. Mayor, and not about political posturing. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Councillor Clark. I've now got Councillor Green.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A great honour to follow Tony. Yes, I mean, I'll be supporting this this resolution, notice of motion this evening. I think quite rightly the public are concerned about the environment and want to protect it. I would just say this, and again, I wasn't intending to speak in this debate, but in terms of the way Liz introduced it, I think Liz should realise or not confuse working together with always doing everything she says, because working across parties in a united way will require compromise and discussion. It won't require Liz said it so everyone's got to do it. All party is exactly that, and working together will need to be a two-way street, Mr. Mayor, and it requires listening as well as telling. So whilst I think most people realise I'm a great supporter of us working across party in the interests of residents, I'm sure, and I hope in her reply, that Liz will take the opportunity to say that she'll be listening as well as telling and responding to people's concerns, not just, forcing things against other people's will. There will be the need to compromise and to make agreements and to take, it's all very well to be, in the vanguard of the movement and so on, but there's also, leadership requires fellowship, and I think it's probably a good idea to make sure that we listen as well as just tell. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Green. I've got Councillor Norbury now.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and fascinating to listen to the debate. Again, my golden thread running through everything I've said tonight is inequality. Inequality that we've seen in areas due to COVID, inequality that we've seen in areas, particularly areas I represent, in economically challenged areas like Birkenhead, to do with planning and creating safe and affordable homes for people. And now we come to the environment. I've noted the air quality report that's been produced by the council. The air quality report says that there is particular areas where the air quality is very poor, and there's other areas where the air quality is not poor, but it's not great, and we've got to do a lot more to improve that. I would like every single councillor to watch the documentary by Sir Richard Attenborough about his witness statement over his lifetime regarding what's coming in another lifetime if we don't act radically. We need public transport, and we need cycle lanes and walking lanes that do take fossil fuel producing vehicles off the road. We saw during the lockdown how clear the air was and how people could breathe clean, fresh air when there was no cars on the road. No one's saying take all the cars off the road. People are saying let's move as quickly as we can and as radically as we can to sustainable, safe, affordable transport that doesn't clog people's lungs up. We saw with coronavirus affects the respiratory system. Our perfect, beautiful intelligence service has heat maps right across the Wirral regarding the worst effects of coronavirus and the worst effects of winter deaths. Winter deaths are mainly caused by respiratory problems, and they all map to the same areas, the most economically challenged areas. So the environment is something that we really need to focus on. And Liz is right in what she says. We need to do it now. We honestly haven't got time for massive debates over what we should and shouldn't be doing. We all need to work together, work with the general public and work with the rest of the world on saving the human race. The planet will still be here. It's the human race that will disappear. So I urge everyone just to educate themselves and watch the Sir Richard Attenborough documentary. We're building a ship at Camel Heads. Hopefully it'll be launched very shortly.
Okay, 15 seconds, Tony, quickly.
And if you want a leader to follow, there's the guy to follow. Please watch that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. Can I have next one, Councillor Lewis, Ian Lewis.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor, and thank you again for the opportunity to speak in this debate. Mr. Mayor, I'm beginning to think that this council has two Councillor Liz Grays. The Councillor Liz Gray, who we heard from earlier, with this carefully worded but unspecific notice of motion, compared with the Councillor Gray of 2 weeks ago, who voted to sell the green space at Upton in spite of the protests of the Green Party leader and residents. Mr. Mayor, Councillor Liz Gray earlier tonight said that we all need to work together and we need to work together now. Mr. Mayor, Councillor Liz Gray has given that commitment. I hope that will therefore include that she will work together with the disabled parent of Keswick Road in Wallasey, who would have to carry her child to the door if Councillor Gray's proposals come to fruition, or the double amputee in the Willows who cannot cycle to work, or the nurse who lives on Seaview Road who would have to walk for 10 minutes having finished a shift at Arrow Park Hospital to get to her front door because she could no longer park in front of her house. Mr. Mayor, there is a fallacy that cycle lanes take cars off the road. They do not. Cycle lanes merely force cars into other roads. That is the issue, Mr. Mayor. But if Councillor Gray, whose hand is now raised again to take part in this debate, if Councillor Gray is now planning to turn over a new leaf and wants to consult and work with local people and local councillors, clearly it would be churlish of any councillor not to accept that offer. But the position we are in with the cycle lanes in Wallasey and the beach at Hoylake is directly because of the failure to work with local residents and to consult with them and to, in effect, tell the residents what is best for them without consulting them on the details of those plans. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Karubia.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for the opportunity to speak on this. I wasn't going to mention anything on this either, but it strikes me that we're always talking about, when we talk about climate change, and I'm all for climate, to fixing the climate change issues and the problems that we have, and I understand a lot about it. And I did watch the David Attenborough documentary. Thanks, Tony. My concern is that we seem to be always talking about cars. And it seems to be the massive thing that the only thing we talk about is getting vehicles off the road and having people on cycles. Why aren't we as a council looking at things like single-use plastic a little bit more effectively than we have done in the past? We discussed it once, I think, and I don't know what's come of it. Why aren't we not looking at getting rid of all the packaging that comes with food that doesn't need to be in a carton, within a case, within a carton, and then 2 lots of double plastic over it? Why aren't we looking at things that we can actually achieve without, as a first instance? And I forget which councillor mentioned it before, but to get the residents of Wirral on board with us on how we can affect change, we can do so many things that would affect us and the environment that we can actually achieve without causing so much grief to the residents by saying, well, you can't park here, you can't have a car. We want to build the new set in Birkenhead where there's no vehicles whatsoever. It's ridiculous that, because people need their vehicles. There are a lot of society that cannot operate without their own vehicles. The fact that we have appalling buses and trains it just doesn't make any sense. You're never going to convince people to leave their cars at home and go on public transport unless public transport is fixed. And it has to be fixed to such a standard that people will be willing to do that. So why aren't we concentrating on things like plastic bags? Let's get rid of those. We did 2 pence on a plastic bag, made a massive difference. Didn't make a big enough difference, but it made a big difference. So why aren't we concentrating on things that we can actually achieve, like single-use plastic bottles of water? We had a motion that had refillable bottle stations in the shops. I don't know what came of that. We're very good, we seem to be, in this council of putting motions through, but then not following them through and finding out whether it's been successful, or whether it's actually achieved anything. So I would like, for one, to stop here and let's get rid of all the cars and put more bike cycles everywhere, and then start looking at things we can actually achieve. As a fact, I can't remember the exact number of football pitches that are demolished every year
15 seconds.
In the rainforest to produce paper and various other things. And I know we've gone paperless, but let's start looking a little bit outside the box and leave the cars alone a little bit and start looking at other things. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Right, before I move on, I've got a point of order here from Councillor Liz Gray. Vicky, can you come in on this with me?
I suspect, Mr. Mayor, that Councillor Gray might want to clarify something in relation to a point made in Councillor Lewis's comments. Is that correct, Councillor Gray?
Yes, I was just a little concerned that Councillor Lewis might have nodded off at P&R because he seemed to have failed to notice that I didn't vote for the sale of land at Upton. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Right, can we move on to Councillor Wright?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for allowing me to speak. Just very briefly, I would like to make a comment. Whilst acknowledge the need for collaborative working to tackle the issue of climate change, I think it's really, really important to listen to people in our community and to work to reach a consensus situation. And yes, there might be compromise, but listening to people will actually win hearts and minds, something that has been mentioned this evening. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Can we move on to Councillor Stuart Whittingham?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think some members would well learn the basic lesson that once you start getting personal, you've lost the argument. I would take exception to Councillor Cox's assertion that we're trying to force people out of the cars. to my mind, providing decent cycling facilities is not trying to force people out of the cars. Decent cycling facilities is to try and attract more people to be using bicycles and make it a safe environment for people to use the bicycles. When members talk about and people talk about you need to consult more in terms of cycling schemes, you bet your bobs and dollar that's 99.9% of what people mean is that we need to consult car drivers more. No one seems to really bother about what cyclists think or what potential cyclists think. We need a step change and we need to be brave. And in terms of we need more cycling infrastructure. We need safe routes. We need to be getting young people on bicycles because we can't go on the way we are doing. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Right, sorry, I did miss someone earlier. Sorry, who's PG? Sorry, I haven't got all the names here, so...
It's Councillor Gilchrist, Mr. Mayor.
Oh, sorry, Phil. Sorry, Phil, I didn't realise that. Yeah, so it's your turn, Councillor Phil Gilchrist. Phil.
Oh, very kind, Mr. Mayor. I'm a very patient person, as members know. But of course, on the environmental issue, I've been patient for many years and get as frustrated as everyone else. The other night, I watched a programme about crop spraying of strawberries that was 40 years old programme, and the amount of chemicals that people thought it right to pour at plants and insects in those days. Well, we've learned from our lessons, I hope. But of course, on agriculture, or gardening in my case, I can see how things are changing. Things I used to prune or let die back 20 years ago are flourishing because the climate has changed. And that's something we need to recognise and something we see whenever we have major floods or droughts now. We've lived probably, I'm nearly 70, but in my life I've probably seen 50 years of technological fixes where we've moved the boundaries, found a solution and got round a few technical problems. But we do need things like a scrappage scheme for old cars, for example. We do need to encourage active travel. Now, I was present, in fact, I was chairing the Active Travel Forum when the ideas for the New Brighton through Wallasey, through Liskeard to Seacombe scheme was first raised. And obviously, I'm now aware that there are objections to it, which I anticipated at the time, because when I chaired it, I said we needed to consult residents. So we move forward, if we can, with agreement wherever we can get it, because the underlying issue, as Councillor Whittingham rightly said, is making it safe and right and encouraging for young people and mothers and children to walk, cycle, cross the road safely, cycle to the shops. I think Councillor Cox talked about posturing earlier on, and Councillor Green talked about compromise. Well, there's a need to remember that it is our survival and the survival of many forms of wildlife, insects, things that you can barely see with microscopes that actually produce the ecosystem that we all rely on in the food chain. So, Mr. Mayor, we've been talking about this for 50 years that I can know of. I planted a tree in 73. Well, they survived to 74. I still remember it. So, Mr. Mayor, we have a responsibility to future generations to encourage people, to help them to make the right choices, and that's what this motion is, I hope, about. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gilchrist. Councillor Mike Collins. Councillor Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for this opportunity of talking. I will be supporting this motion, but what I would like to say is that our green spaces and our green belt have the bulk of our trees in our area, and as much has been made of our trees. They're vital to our climate, vital to remove particulates and everything else. So I'd like to ask for cross-party unity in preserving our green spaces and green belt from the unnecessary development and reduction of our mature trees. We know any tree that is hacked down will be replaced, but saplings and young trees cannot reduce the pollution so effectively removed by the mature trees. So I'm totally in agreement with this climate change motion, but I do ask for consideration for our green belt and our trees in those areas. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Collins. Now move on to Councillor Usher.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just want to pick up on a couple of comments and make some myself. I don't think Councillor Lewis or Councillor Cox or anyone could point to some evidence of the claim that councillors are trying their best to force people out of their cars. And it's quite disingenuous to frame any schemes that are currently ongoing in this way. And I suppose I can only guess that this might be what Councillor Gray is actually referring to when she feels that not everyone is coming up to the mark when they signed up to the climate emergency and may only be paying lip service to the idea. What we're trying to do is actually ensure that there's a shift in balance so that people have choice. And this isn't just about the need to have more sustainable travel. It's about an agenda that we should all be interested in. It's about providing access for non-drivers. It's about ensuring the linking up of leisure and employment opportunities for some of our poorest communities where car ownership is at its lowest. And it's about improving health and the environmental quality in which people exist, which was picked up on by Councillor Norbury on his comments around air quality. I would really like to point out some comments from local people that I'm hoping that Councillor Lewis and others can actually take into account when they consider our response to certain schemes that will allow us to give people choice, not take cars off the road, but to ensure there's infrastructure for people to safely choose something other than a car. So 17-year-olds who can't drive, under 17-year-olds who can't drive, and who at the moment, if they want to cycle somewhere, have to use road space when the current levels of deaths on our roads would shock anyone.
Councillor Usher, 15 seconds left.
Thank you. Drivers who want to cut down on their carbon emissions, older people who have lost their licenses and don't feel safe cycling on the roads. These are the people's voices who we need to be amplifying, and we need to do so in consultation with residents, but we need to actually be honest about communicating the benefits and otherwise of certain schemes. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Councillor.
Yes,
Councillor
Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, it's people misuse the point of order continually because it's not a point of order, but Vicky can clarify. I think I'm entitled, if you'll indulge me, an opportunity to clarify exactly what I said before. Councillor Usher was looking for some clarity. I can give him clarity if he so wishes.
Sorry, just hold on, Councillor Cox. Sorry. Councillor, Vicky, can you...
If a comment that a member was made was misunderstood, then the member can correct that. Obviously, it's a matter for your discretion, Mr. Mayor, but it should just be a clarification of an issue that perhaps may have been misunderstood.
Happy to pick this up outside of the meeting, Mr. Mayor.
I'm happy to make a statement now, Mr. Mayor, since I'm on camera.
No, okay, no, I'd like to, I've got some other people who are waiting to speak, Tony, so I'll just move on that, and perhaps you can clarify it.
Thank you for that, Mr. Mayor. Very generous of you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to the full council tonight on this subject. There's a great deal of goodwill, for the climate emergency and all things around the climate. The question for this council is how to engage with people, because basically we've failed in that with initiatives we've done in the past. And I can use the example in my own ward, which is obviously quite high profile. You know, if we make decisions before we consult, then we are not going to bring people with us. That is the case at Hoylake Beach. We've got to get away from, I think, as Councillor Karubia said, from being seen to attack the car and be more holistic in our approach to all things environment. And I can use Hoylake Beach as an example of that, because Hoylake Beach is approximately, I think it's 50 acres. The bit the contentious bit is 50 acres. Elsewhere in the ward, there's 50 acres of unremediated former tip land. We don't know what methane's coming out of that. We do know that it bleeds colours in heavy rain. We do know that, well, residents report blue algae coming out of the lake that's nearby there. There's even budget set aside to assess that, and yet it hasn't been assessed and it hasn't been addressed. We know those things, but it's not quite as glamorous as naturalising a beach or creating cycle lanes. And just a little bit further down into the ward, the marine lake is full of sargassum weed, which is toxic to certain organisms. We don't drain it, and we're scared to actually dredge it out. So, you know, there's much more environmental issues that are real environmental issues, you know, really pertinent to local people. We don't engage in those, but we go for the high profile. We go for, you know, what some people will call virtue signalling. And I don't decry the benefit of cycle lanes, but, you know, I mean, we've tried, I've spoken at great length with Councillor Cleary about trying to bring forward motions for tram systems and the like. We can't get a tram system vote through this council. A mass transport system based on electric power is obviously the way forward, in my opinion, but it's expensive, it's difficult to do, and it's been seen in the past to be politically quite difficult to get through. But we shouldn't be afraid of those challenges.
Right,
So,
Councillor Gardner, 15 seconds left. Can you just...
I would just urge for echo my colleague Councillor Green in a true collaboration. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you for doing that. Right, the last speaker I think that we've got on this motion, and then I think we move on to the seconder of the motion. But last one, Councillor McLaughlin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have to say, this isn't something that I was going to speak on. I often say that, but I was moved to because I'm so disappointed of the tone of this debate. This notice of motion, more than almost anything else that we've talked about tonight, should be something on which there was cross-party agreement. And actually, there is. Everybody, I think, from what I've heard said, is going to vote on this notice of motion in a positive way. But actually, the tone of the debate from the very start, has been one of finger-pointing and then defensiveness. There should be an acceptance that we haven't moved far enough on the notice of motion that was passed by this council last year. But we need to stop this petty nonsense in our debates. We genuinely need to start to work together. We've been doing it on other things. This, more than anything, requires that we do that. And instead of mouthing sentences and then undermining those by the way we behave, we need to actually get on with this. We haven't got time for this childish sort of debate that we've had.
Okay, thank you. Right, I'm going to move on to the seconder of the motion. Councillor Cleary, you now have up to 3 minutes to speak to the motion.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Interesting debate. I'd just like to start off by looking back a little bit and examine some of the things we've done over recent years and how the environment has fared in those decisions. My first example would be our food waste recycling plans, which we had a few years ago. They seem to have been abandoned and left in the too difficult folder. We had ambitious and much needed plans for 20-mile-an-hour speed limits in all residential areas, and here we are years later still talking about it. And despite our dire budget situation at the moment, we haven't even reinstated our modest car parking charges, even though the health and environmental benefits are obvious. And as mentioned earlier, even though we've got a brownfield first housing policy, just 2 weeks ago we agreed to sell off council land to a multinational company, Lidl, for yet another superstore. I mean, it's 2020. How on earth is that decision compatible with the climate emergency and the goals set out in the Paris Climate Accord? So, Mr. Mayor, every time there is a perceived conflict between business as usual and the environment, it seems Mother Earth gets kicked in the teeth. But as every school striker knows, there is no economy on a dead planet. So there's clearly a gaping and ever-widening chasm between our rhetoric and our actions when it comes to the environment. And Mr. Mayor, this is not lost on the public, who are increasingly impatient at 20th century politicians failing to rise to the greatest challenge of the 21st century. And the clearest example of that is the Citizens' Assembly in this country from earlier this year, when over 100 people selected at random recommended actions far exceeding current government policy. And they included a frequent flyer tax, a change in diet driven by education to reduce meat and dairy consumption, greater reliance on local produce and local food production, reduced car use and greater public investment in wind and solar. So, Mr. Mayor, instead of caving into the vocal minority who always resist change, we need to remember that 2/3 of the public say they want much stronger action on the climate. So the public is actually way ahead of the politicians, and the politicians don't seem to realise that they are to a large extent pushing at an open door if they do it the right way. I'd just like to take up a few of the comments that were made earlier that were particularly disappointing, I felt. I would invite Councillor Cox to look at places like Amsterdam, Stockholm, Copenhagen, Oslo. Look at them in January and February and see how many people are actually riding bicycles. It is a complete myth to say that people do not cycle in the winter. It's just wrong. You're just factually wrong about that. People will cycle if you make it safe for them to cycle. And all of those places and many others have got people to shift from cars to bicycles by putting in safe infrastructure. You can get people out of cars.
15 seconds.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. It was just a bit disappointing to hear those comments because they're not factually based. And we need factually based evidence and policies if we're going to make progress on this. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, thank you. Thanks very much. Right, the right to reply now from the proposer of the motion, Councillor Liz Gray. You have up to 3 minutes.
Thank you. I won't take 3 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm really grateful to all those councillors and the officers that really do get the emergency, the environment and climate emergency, and also who act so that Wirral residents are better protected. The motion is simply a reminder that we have said we will act, and it's a request that we do work together with residents on these most important issues. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Gray. Right, there'll be no further speakers. I now propose moving to the vote. Now we can do this either by assent or roll call by Vicky.
Assent.
Assent, Mr. Mayor. Has everyone agreed on that?
Assent. Agreed.
Agreed. No dissent. No. No. Okay. Okay. That's been agreed then by assent. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Right. I'm just looking at the time now. It's about nearly 5 minutes. Is it? Yeah, 5 minutes to 9. And the guillotine does come down at 9. But we move on to motion 5. Reducing road casualties. I now invite Councillors Brahim and Stewart and Kelly to move and second the motion at page 11 of the summons.
I'm happy to move the motion, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, okay.
I'll second that, Mr. Mayor.
I've had a suggestion about just movers and seconders rather than going, since we're very close to the guillotine. What do the...
Mr. Mayor, by the time the mover has spoken, the guillotine will come down, won't it? I think that'll be done for you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, right. Okay, thank you, Councillor Kelly. Okay, Councillor Bain, yes? Yeah, you proposed it, yeah?
Right, thank you, Mr. Mayor. We seem to have had now...
Councillor Kelly, second the motion. Yes?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I had. Second.
Okay, Councillor Bain, yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I hope the spirit of unanimity will survive one more debate. I'm sure that speeding traffic is one of the most frequent concerns that's raised by residents in all our wards across Wirral. And I know that earlier this year, in April, Councillor Liz Gray organised a letter which was signed jointly by members of all parties on the council, which was sent to the Chief Constable, raising our concern about the perceived rise in traffic speed in many areas, because at that time there was a decrease in the number of vehicles following our entry into the first lockdown. Now, while the number of those killed or seriously injured in road traffic accidents has decreased across the country in recent years, it's hugely concerning that Merseyside continues to have the worst figures in the country. And last year, 507 people were injured or killed in accidents in Wirral. And that is a serious problem that we need to address. And in the spirit of Councillor Norbury talking about deprivation, it's worth noting that the highest number of those casualties took place in our most socially deprived wards. But the purpose of my motion is twofold. Firstly, to recognise the pressures on the police. The motion cites a deeply worrying report from the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy, which says, among other things, that there's been a 34% cut in funding in real terms for road policing between 2012 and 2020, leading to a reduction of police officers available for those duties. That those officers receive insufficient training and operational support, and that road policing is seen as less of a priority than it should be in most local plans. Now, if the Chief Constable has to make choices between where to deploy officers, it is understandable that speeding offences are never going to be the top priority. So we are urging group leaders to make a joint approach to the Home Secretary and the Secretary of State for Transport to restore that funding for our road policing so that we can address the menace of speeding. But the second purpose is closer to home, Mr. Mayor. When approaches are made to introduce traffic calming or speed reduction measures in our wards, the regular response that we get is that accident figures do not warrant action at this time. Well, when budgets are constrained, that is understandable. But it's not just a matter of accidents. Speeding traffic creates a stressful environment. Fast-moving vehicles may kill and injure fewer pedestrians and cyclists than they used to, but that's partly because pedestrians and cyclists are deterred from using those roads in the first place. Instead of the piecemeal designation of local areas as 20-mile-per-hour zones, how much simpler and more effective to establish a 20-mile-per-hour limit as the norm on Wirral's residential roads? When driving around a local housing estate, nothing is gained by going at 30 or 40 miles an hour. Slower moving traffic in places where people live and exercise, where children ride their bikes or make their way to school, would create a more pleasant, a safer and a more enjoyable environment for us all. So I urge members to support this motion and to ask our new Environment Committee to revisit the issue of 20-mile-per-hour limits on our residential roads, with a view to bringing forward fresh proposals as soon as possible. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. Right, I'm minded to go on now and open the debate. Are there any speakers? And you will have up to 3 minutes to address the council. All right, okay. Okay, I'm getting some sort of messages here. Some people preferring we just only have the proposer and then move to a vote. Is that the agreement of members?
Agreed.
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 Okay, thank you. Any dissent? No? Okay.
Mr. Mayor, excuse me, Mr. Mayor, I did have my hand up, but clearly I just wanted to make a comment at your behest, whether or not you let me.
If I'm not going to let other people, Councillor Rennie, I'm just a bit concerned about that, yeah. I would have to open the debate really to other speakers if I
Mr. Mayor, if I promise that I won't actually speak what I was going to say, but just perhaps to add one final suggestion, if you would perhaps allow that without me speaking to the motion. Clearly, you know, I've been involved in policing for a large part of my life, and our group would fully support this notice of motion. But could I perhaps also suggest that the new partnership committee have a look at this issue as well, and perhaps we could have the opportunity to invite representatives from the police and also from Merseyside Fire and Rescue in to join us to have a virtual roundtable discussion on this, and I'm sure we would have the support of those agencies as well. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I appreciate you letting me say at least a little something. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rennie, for that.
Can I just come in there as the chair of the partnership committee? Thank you very much for that suggestion. We are actually meeting, as you know, Councillor Rennie, tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. to discuss our work plan for the committee. So I'm happy to take that for discussion tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you,
Councillor Spriggs. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, seconder of the motion, Councillor Kelly, do you just want to say something?
I'm happy at this point to give way to the board solicitor, who obviously wishes to address you on the matter of 9 o'clock, Mr. Mayor, probably.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So you just second the motion.
Well, I'll just hear what the solicitor has to say.
Okay, okay then. Okay, Vicky, can you give us direction on that?
Well, Mr. Mayor, the meeting has now been going on for 3 hours. So according to standing orders, we should move to have the seconder and the right of reply of the mover of the motion, and then move to the vote.
Okay, thank you for that, Vicky. Okay, Councillor Kelly, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wasn't certain whether the 9 o'clock guillotine silenced me or not, and I certainly wouldn't want to go outside the rules, not while Tony Cox is here having read them, as he's indicated in the. I agree with
some of us had to.
I agree with what's been said, and the contribution there from Leslie Rennie. There is a cross-cutting nature to what's going on, and I think the only other thing I wanted to comment on, the move Alan Brain mentioned 20 mile an hour zones in residential areas. It was as far back, Mr. Mayor, as March this year, where the council budget was passed. Sort of the second week in March, and we resolved to ask the new committees to do exactly that, to look into the possibility of 20 mile an hour schemes in residential areas. As you know, Mr. Mayor, that budget passed in March only survived the first 2 weeks of April, when it all went rather off track. It might be some time before we're able actually to pull the budget together, because at the end of the day, what is going to be required to improve road safety and the pedestrian and cycle experience and reduce accidents are the resources to be in place. And if there's no government resources, then there would have to be local resources, and it needs to be given. It needs to be given the priority that it deserves once the budget is back on an even keel, Mr. Mayor. And I shall leave it there.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Kelly. Right, Councillor Brain, you have a right to reply and address the council for up to 3 minutes.
I don't want to take up the council's time too much further, Mr. Mayor. As Stuart Kelly rightly says, obviously this isn't perhaps the immediate moment to implement a scheme, but it's one we need to have ready for when we do find ourselves in a happier financial situation. And I certainly take on board Leslie Rennie's point, excellent suggestion.
Okay, thank you. Thanks. Right, to be no further speakers, I think we can now move to the vote. And again, I'm going to do this either by assent or roll call. So if I say by assent,
by assent, Mr. Mayor. Assent, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
By assent.
No, agreed. Agreed, everyone? Yes, okay, so that's agreed. Thank you very much. Right, we want to motion 6, and now we are going to just have proposers and seconders of the motion. So motion 6 is save our local jobs and services. Now invite councillors Brian Kenny, Joe Burr to move and second the motion at page 12 of the summons. Councillor Kenny.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If you look at the wording of motion number 6, I think you'll see that it's a crucial motion. It's current.
Can you just
relevant.
propose it? I think we're not having discussions on it.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Mayor. Well, in that case, formally move motion number 6.
Okay, Councillor Bird.
I formally second motion number 6.
Okay, there. Okay, I think we're now going on to am I doing right, Vicky? Is that the correct procedure?
Yes, we're going to move to the vote now, Mr. Mayor.
We're going to the vote, yeah. So again, this can be either by assent or...
Assent, Mr. Mayor.
Assent,
okay.
Mr. Mayor, please.
Do I hear any objections to that?
Assent.
Roll call, Mr. Mayor.
Roll call, please, Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
Roll call.
Right, we've heard roll call then, yes, okay, we've heard roll call. We will do a roll call then. Vicky, I'll have to ask you to do this again.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Anderson.
Against.
Councillor Berry.
Against.
Councillor Bird.
For.
Councillor Brain.
For.
Councillor Burgess-Joyce.
Against.
Councillor Cameron.
Against.
Councillor Cannon.
For.
Councillor Carabea.
Councillor Carabea, 4. Thank you.
Councillor Cleary.
4.
Councillor Clements.
Councillor Clements against.
Councillor Collins.
Councillor Collins against.
Councillor Cook.
Councillor Cook, 4.
Councillor Corkill.
Andy Corkill, 4.
Councillor Cottier.
Tony Cottier, 4.
Councillor Cox.
Against.
Councillor George Davis.
Councillor George Davis, 4.
Councillor Fawkes.
4. Councillor Fawkes, 4.
Councillor Frost.
Councillor Sam Frost, 4.
Councillor Gardner.
Councillor Gardner, against.
Councillor Gilchrist.
4. Thank you.
Councillor Greenie.
Councillor Cardini, 4.
Councillor Green.
Against.
Councillor Gray.
Councillor Gray, 4.
Councillor Paul Hayes.
Against.
Councillor Steve Hayes.
4.
Councillor Andrew Hodson.
Against.
Councillor Kathy Hodson.
Councillor Catherine Hodson against.
Councillor Johnson.
Councillor Johnson against.
Councillor Adrian Jones.
4.
Councillor Chris Jones.
Chris Jones, 4.
Councillor Tony Jones.
Tony Jones, 4.
Councillor Jordan.
Councillor Jordan against.
Councillor Kelly.
Stuart Kelly, 4.
Councillor Kenny.
Councillor Brian Kenny, 4.
Councillor Leach.
Councillor Leach, 4.
Councillor Lewis.
Ian Lewis against.
Councillor McLaughlin.
4.
Councillor McManus.
Councillor McManus, 4.
Councillor Mitchell.
4.
Councillor Muspratt.
4.
Councillor Nolan.
Councillor Nolan, 4.
Councillor Norbury.
4, Vicky.
Councillor Povell.
Against.
Councillor Rennie.
Councillor Rennie against.
Councillor Robinson.
Councillor Robinson, 4.
Councillor Rowlands.
Against.
Councillor Smith.
Abstain.
Councillor Spur.
4.
Councillor Spriggs.
4.
Councillor Stewart.
Councillor Paul Stewart, 4.
Councillor Sullivan.
Mike Sullivan for, and shame on everybody who's voting against this motion.
Councillor Usher.
Come on.
For.
Councillor Usher.
Councillor Usher for.
Thank you. Councillor Walsh.
Councillor Joe Walsh for.
Councillor Whittingham.
Proudly for.
Councillor Irene Williams.
For.
Councillor Jerry Williams.
For.
Councillor Steve Williams.
Councillor Steve Williams against.
Councillor Williamson.
For.
Councillor Wood.
For.
Councillor Wright.
Councillor Wright against.
Thank you, members. I'll just wait for the results.
Okay, voting was 39 for, 20 against, 1 abstention. So that's been carried. Thank you. Right, we move on to motion 7, which is cancel local authority debt. I now invite councillors Joe Bird and Christina Muspratt to move and second the motion at page 13 of the summons. Right, proposal of the motion, Councillor Bird, can you?
I formally move.
Councillor Muspratt?
Formally second, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. We'll now move
We
on.
can have a roll call on this, please, Mr. Mayor.
Right, okay, we will do that then if we've been asked. Okay, so a roll call on this again, Vicky. Thank you.
Councillor Anderson.
Against.
Councillor Berry.
Against.
Councillor Bird.
Absolutely for.
Councillor Brame.
Alan Brame for.
Councillor Burgess-Joyce.
Absolutely against.
Councillor Cameron.
Against.
Councillor Cannon.
For.
Councillor Carabea.
Councillor Carabea for, thank you.
Councillor Cleary.
For.
Councillor Clements.
Councillor Clements for. Against. I beg your pardon.
Councillor Collins.
Councillor Mike Collins against.
Councillor Cook.
Councillor Cook for.
Councillor Corkill.
Andy Corkill for.
Councillor Cottier.
Tony Cottier for.
Councillor Cox.
Against.
Councillor Davis.
Councillor Davis for.
Councillor Fowkes.
Councillor Fowkes for.
Councillor Frost.
Councillor Sam Frost for.
Councillor Gardner.
Councillor Gardner against.
Councillor Gilchrist.
For, thank you.
Councillor Greenie.
Councillor Colbrady for.
Councillor Green.
Councillor Jeff Green against.
Councillor Gray.
Councillor Gray for.
Councillor Paul Hayes.
Against.
Councillor Steve Hayes.
For.
Councillor Andrew Hodson.
Against.
Councillor Kathy Hodson.
Councillor Catherine Hodson against.
Councillor Johnson.
Councillor Johnson against.
Councillor Adrian Jones.
For.
Councillor Chris Jones.
Chris Jones for.
Councillor Tony Jones.
Tony Jones for.
Councillor Jordan.
Councillor Mary Jordan against.
Councillor Kelly.
Stuart Kelly for.
Councillor Kenny.
Councillor Brian Kenny for.
Councillor Leach.
Councillor Nita Leach for.
Councillor Lewis.
Ian Lewis, like Keir Starmer, against.
Councillor Moira McLaughlin.
Councillor Moira McLaughlin for.
Councillor McManus.
Councillor McManus for.
Councillor Mitchell.
Councillor Mitchell for.
Councillor Muspratt.
Councillor Muspratt for.
Councillor Nolan.
Councillor Nolan for.
Councillor Norbury.
For Vicky, thank you. Cheers.
Councillor Povell.
Against.
Councillor Rennie.
Councillor Leslie Rennie against.
Councillor Robinson.
Councillor Robinson for.
Councillor Rowlands.
Councillor Rowlands against.
Councillor Smith.
Abstain.
Councillor Spur.
Sarah Spore for.
Councillor Spriggs.
Councillor Christine Spriggs for.
Councillor Stewart.
Councillor Paul Stewart for.
Councillor Sullivan.
Mike Sullivan for. Please don't take Keir Starmer's name in vain. Please.
Councillor Russia.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Russia.
Come on.
Councillor Russia for.
Councillor Walsh.
Councillor Joe Walsh for.
Councillor Whittingham.
Councillor Wiskingham, I don't know how those on the Tory benches sleep at night. For.
Councillor Irene Williams.
Councillor Irene Williams for.
Councillor Jerry Williams.
For.
Councillor Steve Williams.
Councillor Steve Williams against.
Councillor Williamson.
For.
Councillor Wood.
Councillor Gillian Wood for.
Councillor Wright. Councillor Wright.
Sorry, Councillor Wright against.
Thank you, members.
It's a great shame we couldn't debate that one.
Agreed.
Well, Labour Party's got their own list.
All right, the voting was as follows. Those in favour for 39, against 21, abstention. So that was carried. Members, that concludes this evening's meeting. First of all, before I finish though, a big thank you once again to all the officers who arranged this virtual meeting. I think, you know, a lot of work is put into this, and I think it's gone very well again this evening. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and see you the next time on Zoom. Okay, cheers, bye everyone.
Thank you,
Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you,
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, everybody.